The park was unusually quiet that evening. The leaves swayed gently in the autumn breeze, scattering across the gravel path where the fading sunlight painted golden streaks. Aisha sat on a worn bench near the fountain, her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her bag. She had passed by this place many times before, but that day her eyes lingered on something she had never noticed properly. An empty chair, old and wooden, standing awkwardly beneath a large oak tree. It seemed out of place, as though it belonged somewhere else, but at the same time it commanded her attention. The seat was chipped, its paint peeling, but there was something strangely dignified about it, as if it had once been important. Aisha felt her heart tighten without knowing why. There was an odd pull in her chest, a whisper in her mind, as though the chair held a story no one else could see. She stood still for a long moment, staring at it. The park grew quieter. The laughter of children faded in the distance. And in that silence, she felt the sharp pang of loss rise within her. Memories she thought she had buried clawing their way back. She could almost hear the soft hum of her grandmother's voice, feel the warmth of her hands against her cheek, and see the knowing smile that had always made the world seem less frightening. Her grandmother had been gone for nearly 2 years, but her absence was a wound that never closed. That chair reminded her of the seat at home that still sat empty, untouched, in the corner of their small living room. The same chair where her grandmother used to sit every evening with a cup of tea, telling stories, listening with patience, or silently watching the world pass by from the window. Even now, the family refused to move it. It had become a symbol of her presence, and her absence. Aisha sat down on the bench across from the park's lonely chair, her chest heavy. It felt almost like fate had led her there, as though the universe wanted her to remember. Her grandmother, she thought, would not have wanted her to wallow in grief. She was a woman of quiet strength and endless kindness, someone who believed that even the smallest act of compassion could ripple outward and change lives. Aisha remembered the words spoken to her on the last evening they had together, words that still echoed in her mind. Be kind, Aisha, even when it hurts. Even when the world gives you every reason not to be, choose kindness. That is where true strength lives. Those words had been a promise, but promises were difficult to keep in a world that often seemed harsh and unfeeling. Aisha sometimes wondered if her grandmother had asked too much of her. She was young, she was ordinary, and she often felt powerless against the struggles of life. And yet, sitting there in that park, watching the empty chair, she realized she could not let go of those words. They were not just her grandmother's legacy, they had become the foundation of who she was. She closed her eyes, letting the memories wash over her. The warmth of evenings by her grandmother's side, the stories of kindness shown to strangers, the lessons whispered over tea and bread, and the way her grandmother always reminded her that kindness was not a weakness, but a form of courage. The memory pulled her back into childhood, where everything began. Her grandmother's house had always been full of life. It was not a large house, but it carried the scent of old books, warm bread, and jasmine flowers from the garden outside. Aisha remembered the afternoons spent in that house, the sunlight streaming through lace curtains while her grandmother's hands moved gracefully over her embroidery, or while she read aloud from her favorite books. One afternoon in particular stood out. Aisha had been barely 8 years old, and she had been upset over a quarrel with a friend from school. She had stormed into her grandmother's room, angry tears spilling down her cheeks, complaining that the friend had betrayed her. Her grandmother listened quietly, her eyes kind and her hands gently patting the cushion of the chair where she always sat. When Aisha had finished, her grandmother asked, "Do you want to know the secret to mending a broken friendship?" Aisha sniffled and nodded. "Do not let anger be the final word," her grandmother said. "Sometimes people hurt us because they are hurting themselves. It does not excuse their behavior, but it reminds us that everyone carries burdens we cannot see. If you choose kindness, you give them a chance to change. And whether they change or not, you will remain whole." Those words had seemed simple then, but as the years passed, Aisha learned their weight. She had seen her grandmother live by them time and again. When neighbors quarreled, she was the first to bring tea and calm words. When strangers knocked at the door in need, she never turned them away. Even when people took advantage of her generosity, she forgave them, not because she was weak, but because she believed that bitterness poisoned only the one who carried it. It was not always easy. There were times when Aisha herself grew frustrated, asking, "Why do you let people treat you this way? Why do you not stand up for yourself?" Her grandmother had only smiled, her eyes shining with a wisdom Aisha was too young to fully understand. Standing up for yourself and being kind are not opposites. True strength is when you can protect yourself without hardening your heart. Those words stayed with her, echoing louder after her grandmother's death. When her grandmother passed, the house fell quieter. Her mother grew stricter, her patience worn thin by years of hardship. Her father, though kind in his own way, was often away working long hours, and Aisha felt the emptiness most of all. She would sit in her grandmother's chair, clutching the embroidered cushions, still carrying the faintest trace of her perfume. It was in those moments she made her silent promise that she would try to live as her grandmother had taught her, even if it cost her more than she thought she could bear. Years passed, and Aisha grew into a young woman. Life tested her resolve in ways she could not have imagined. The world did not reward kindness easily. People mocked her for being too soft, for helping strangers, for giving when she had little herself. There were times when betrayal cut deep, when she questioned whether her grandmother's way was truly wise. But whenever doubt threatened to swallow her, she would return to the chair, sit in silence, and remember. Her grandmother's presence seemed to linger there, urging her forward. One evening, as rain poured outside, she sat by the chair again, tears rolling down her face after another day of feeling invisible, of giving and receiving nothing in return. She whispered into the silence, "Why did you ask this of me? Amiyan, why did you make me promise something so hard?" The house creaked with the sound of the storm, but in her heart she felt the faintest whisper, because the world needs light, even when it does not deserve it. Aisha wiped her tears, her resolve hardening once more. It was during these years that she met Hina. They had been classmates, and though not close at first, circumstances brought them together. Hina came from a struggling family, burdened with debts and endless hardships. Aisha noticed the sadness in her eyes, the quiet desperation she carried, and she could not turn away. She invited her to study together, shared meals, and slowly, a bond of trust grew between them. One day, when Hina broke down, confessing the weight of her family's debts, Aisha felt her heart ache. She remembered her grandmother's words, and knew she could not stay silent. She promised to help, even though she did not yet know how. It was that promise that would soon lead her into battles she had never imagined against powerful men, against her own fears, and even against the doubts of her family. And it all began with the empty chair.
The bond with Hina deepened quickly. There was something in her quiet resilience that reminded Aisha of her grandmother. And yet there was also fragility, a constant fear that tomorrow would take away whatever little she had left. Hina's father had fallen into the clutches of ruthless creditors, men who thrived on exploiting the desperate. Their demands grew harsher each month, until the family could barely breathe under the weight of it all. Aisha visited their small house often. It was dimly lit and carried the heavy air of worry. Hina's mother wore exhaustion like a second skin, and her younger siblings clung to her skirt, their wide eyes reflecting both innocence and hunger. Aisha would bring food when she could, sit with them, help the children with homework, and most of all, listen. She knew she could not erase their suffering with words, but sometimes, she realized, being present was its own kind of salvation. One evening, Hina confided through trembling lips that the creditors had given an ultimatum: pay within weeks or lose the house. Panic laced her words. They will throw us out. Aisha, we will have nowhere to go. Aisha's heart raced, but she forced calm into her voice. We will find a way. Hina, you are not alone in this. Yet when she returned home, her mother's stern expression cut her like a blade. You cannot carry the burdens of the world, Aisha, she said sharply. Kindness is one thing, but involving yourself in debts and dangers is another. Do not let your grandmother's softness blind you. The words stung. Aisha wanted to argue, to say that kindness was not softness, but strength. Instead, she remained silent. Her mother would not understand. Not yet. Days passed, and Aisha searched for answers. She spent hours in the library, poring over legal documents, searching for anything about debt, about protection, about loopholes. It was during one of these long evenings that she first noticed him, a stranger sitting in the far corner, in the very chair she had once thought was broken and unused. He was an older man, his posture slightly bent, his eyes shadowed with years of regret. He never spoke, but his presence unsettled her. At first she ignored him, but then she began to notice how his gaze sometimes lingered on her, as if he knew her. One evening, as she gathered her books, he finally spoke. You remind me of her, he said quietly. Aisha froze. Excuse me, your grandmother, the man said, his voice rough with emotion. You look just like her when she was young. Her breath caught in her throat. How do you know my grandmother? The man's lips trembled as he whispered his name. Yusuf. The name struck her like lightning. Her grandmother had spoken of Yusuf long ago, a man she had once helped, a man who had wronged her deeply. Aisha had thought him long gone, buried in the past, and yet here he was, flesh and blood, sitting in the library as though he had been waiting for her. At first, she wanted to walk away. The stories of betrayal her grandmother had shared burned in her memory. Yusuf had been given kindness, yet he had repaid it with lies and greed. Why should she give him the dignity of listening? But curiosity anchored her to the spot. Why are you here? She asked, her voice cold. Yusuf's eyes glistened. Because I could not die with the weight I carry. Your grandmother saved me when I was nothing, and I repaid her with cruelty. I destroyed her trust. But before she died, she left me a gift pendant, one she wore often. I could not return it to her, but now, it belongs to you. He slid a small box across the table. Aisha opened it slowly. Inside lay the delicate pendant, one she remembered from her childhood. Her grandmother had worn it daily, a golden shape etched with intricate patterns. Tears filled her eyes, but anger burned beneath them. You kept this from her, she demanded. You let her die without returning it. Yusuf bowed his head. I was a coward, but I want to make it right now, through you. Please forgive me. Aisha's chest heaved. Forgive him. After all the pain he had caused her grandmother. After the betrayal that haunted her even in her last years, it felt impossible. Yet she remembered her grandmother's words, "Choose kindness." Even when it hurts, she left without answering, clutching the pendant in her hand. Torn between rage and the legacy she had promised to uphold, for days she wrestled with her emotions. Yusuf's presence unsettled her. His words lingered. At night, she stared at the pendant on her bedside table, wondering what her grandmother would want her to do. Finally, she returned to the library. Yusuf sat in the same chair, waiting. When she approached, his eyes softened with relief. "I cannot forgive you easily," she said, her voice trembling, "but I cannot ignore you either. Tell me why you are really here." And so Yusuf spoke. He told her of his life after betraying her grandmother, years of emptiness, of failures, of chasing wealth that never brought him peace. He admitted he had ruined not only her grandmother's trust but many others as well. He was a man haunted by ghosts, desperate to cleanse his soul before death claimed him. "I am dying, Aisha," he confessed. "I do not know how long I have left, but if there is any way I can atone, I will do it." Her anger softened, though it did not vanish. "Then prove it," she said quietly. "Do something good, not for me, not for yourself, but for those who still suffer." Yusuf nodded, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. But fate is rarely merciful. Days later, news spread that Yusuf had died suddenly. The town gossiped, some speaking of his sins, others of his late attempts at redemption. Aisha wept quietly, not because she had forgiven him, but because he had died before she could decide. In her grief, she received a letter from his relatives. Yusuf had left behind what little wealth he still owned, asking that it be used to help families in need. Among the papers was another letter, written in shaky handwriting. "Aisha, you are the only one who carries her light now. Do not let it fade because of me. Forgive not for my sake but for your own. The world needs your kindness. Do not harden your heart as I did." She pressed the letter to her chest, sobbing. The struggle within her deepened, but slowly, she felt clarity rise. Forgiveness was not about excusing what he had done. It was about freeing herself from the chains of bitterness. She placed the pendant back in the empty chair at home, whispering, "Emion, I will try. For you." Her resolve was soon tested again. Hina's family's situation worsened, with the creditors growing bolder in their threats. Men lurked outside their house, demanding payments that could never be met. Rocks shattered their windows at night. Fear consumed them. Aisha knew she could not stand by. With Yusuf's small inheritance and her own determination, she sought help. That was how she met Mr. Rahman, an elderly lawyer with a reputation for fighting corruption. "This case will not be easy," he warned. "These men thrive on fear. But if you are willing to stand as witness, if you are willing to risk their wrath, we may bring them down." "I will," Aisha said, her voice steady. Her mother's fury returned when she learned of it. "You will destroy yourself. These are dangerous people, Aisha. Do you think kindness will shield you from their knives?" "No," Aisha whispered. "But silence will not shield anyone either." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I already lost my mother to her kindness. Do not make me lose you too." Aisha hugged her tightly, whispering this time, "Kindness will save, not destroy." The first hearing was terrifying. The creditors arrived with expensive lawyers, their faces smug with arrogance. But Mr. Roman's evidence was strong. He revealed the forged contracts, the fraudulent interest rates, the manipulation that had ruined dozens of families. Aisha spoke in court, her voice trembling but unbroken, telling the truth of what she had seen and endured. The judge ordered a halt to Hina's eviction while investigations continued. It was not victory yet, but it was hope. The creditors, furious at being challenged, lashed out with threats. One evening, men cornered Aisha in the street, warning her to drop the case or face consequences. Fear clawed at her, but she remembered her grandmother's voice and refused to back down at home. She sat by the empty chair again, pendant warm in her palm, whispering into the silence, "Amion, give me courage." And somehow, in that silence, she felt it, strength flowing into her like unseen light. The threats grew more sinister with each passing day. Letters were slipped under the door, warning her to stay silent. Strange footsteps echoed behind her at night. Aisha knew the creditors were desperate to break her courage, but every time fear whispered in her ear, she reminded herself of Hina's trembling siblings, of the hollow eyes of families crushed by injustice, of her grandmother's gentle insistence that kindness, even in pain, could move mountains. The case gathered attention in the town. Neighbors whispered, some in admiration, others in fear. Few dared to openly support her, but slowly, a trickle of voices rose. Families who had once cowered in silence began to come forward with their own stories, their own forged documents, their own scars. Mr. Rahman collected it all, weaving a net so strong that even the creditors, expensive lawyers, began to falter. But the creditors were not meant to accept defeat quietly. One night Aisha returned home to find her window shattered, her books scattered across the floor, the words "Stop or Die" scrawled across the wall in black paint. Her mother clutched her in terror, begging her to abandon the fight. "I cannot lose you, Aisha," she cried. "I lost my mother to her softness. I cannot watch you walk into the same fire." Aisha held her tightly, tears soaking her mother's shoulder. "You will not lose me, Oma, I promise. But I cannot walk away either. If I do, what will happen to him, to her family, to the others? Someone has to stand." Her mother wept harder, but for the first time she did not argue. Something in her daughter's resolve silenced her protests. The trial reached its climax in a packed courtroom. The creditor's lead lawyer tore into Aisha during cross-examination, trying to paint her as a foolish girl manipulated by sob stories. But she stood firm, her voice steady, her answers clear. When asked why she risked her own safety for strangers, she paused, letting silence fill the air before answering. "Because my grandmother taught me that kindness is not weakness." She gave without expecting return. She helped even those who hurt her. "I carry her lessons in my heart, and I will not betray them now. If we allow fear to silence us, then cruelty wins. I cannot let that happen." The words rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge's stern expression softened. When Mr. Rahman presented the mountain of evidence, the creditor's empire crumbled. Forged signatures, illegal contracts, threats, bribes, all laid bare for the court to see. The verdict was clear. The creditors were guilty. Their operations would be dismantled, their assets seized, and the families they had exploited would receive restitution. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Hina clutched Aisha's hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You saved us," she whispered. Aisha shook her head. "No, we saved each other." Victory, however, did not erase the scars. The creditors had allies, men still lurking in the shadows, resentful and dangerous. Aisha lived with caution, but she refused to let fear rule her. She continued visiting Hina's family, helping them rebuild their lives. Slowly, joy returned to their little home, laughter echoing once more in its narrow walls. Her mother, once her fiercest critic, began to see her differently. One evening, as they sat together by the empty chair, her mother reached out and took her hand. "You are stronger than I ever realized," she said softly. "I feared your kindness would destroy you, but now I sit as your greatest strength. Your grandmother would be proud." Aisha's eyes filled with tears. "I only hope I can carry her light as she carried it." Her mother smiled faintly. "You already do." Months later, Aisha returned to the library where so much of this journey had begun. The empty chair in the corner still waited, silent and unassuming. She sat there, pendant around her neck, Yusuf's letter in her pocket, and closed her eyes. She imagined her grandmother sitting across from her, eyes warm with pride. She imagined Yusuf, weary and broken, finding some peace in knowing his last act had helped spark change. She imagined the countless families now free from debt, walking with lighter steps because she had refused to be silent. The chair was no longer empty. It was filled with memory, with legacy, with love. Life moved forward. Aisha began writing, pouring her journey into words, telling the stories of the voiceless so they would never again be forgotten. Her writings spread beyond the town, inspiring others to stand against injustice, to believe that kindness could indeed change the world. Hina, once fragile and hopeless, grew stronger too. She pursued her studies with determination, dreaming of becoming a lawyer to fight for others as Aisha had fought for her. Together they built not just friendship but a bond of shared purpose. One evening, as the sun set in hues of gold and crimson, Hina sat beside Aisha on a park bench, watching children play nearby. "You know," Hina said softly, "the empty chair was never really empty. It was waiting for you to fill it with courage, with kindness, with stories that would outlive us both." Aisha smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Then let us never let it be empty again." And with that, the two girls sat side by side, the weight of the past behind them, the light of the future before them, and the chair between them no longer a symbol of loss but of legacy, of love, and of the power of kindness that could not be broken.